I'm Tim Ventura from AmericanAntigravity.com, and I'm joined today by Russell Anderson, who we've interviewed in the past, but Russell has a lot of news to share with us, including the fact that he is now in charge of Searl Aerospace. Well, Russell, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing well. Well, we haven't talked in forever. I think you said 2004 was probably the
Eight
last
years.
time.
Well, we talked, but we haven't had a phone interview in like 8 years.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for people who haven't, who aren't familiar with you, haven't heard our past interview, is you have been doing electrogravitics research for decades, and you have real expertise there. You're one of the top people in the country for it. But the thing that also interested me when we touched base on the phone the other day was you are now working closely with the Searl organization, which is something that I know has been a dream of yours forever.
Yeah, it's funny how, if you fixate on something long enough and intensely enough, it will actually happen. That's called the power of positive thinking or the power of just manifesting reality. It really works.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, now, so you're in charge of Searl Aerospace, and then Searl Technologies Incorporated is the parent company for that, right?
Yeah, Searl Aerospace incorporated in the state of Nevada in July of 2010.
Okay, okay. And then the other one, if I remember right, because you're out in Pennsylvania, the other one is actually in California, the parent company.
Its parent company, I believe, is located in California, Searl Technologies Incorporated. It's a 501 FCC corporation. And Searl Magnetics Incorporated is also incorporated, I believe, in 2010 also. And they've been operational in Southern California, not too far from LA, since September of 2010, so just over 2 years.
Oh, wow. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on right now, or?
Well, they basically, with magnetic mock-up models, been able to demonstrate the Searl effect, its motorability, and the fact that, to get this, pounds and pounds, 8-10 pounds worth of heavy magnets rotating and rolling about their axes and going about 200 RPMs about one stator plate in the SEG single plate and runner gyrocell. They demonstrated that is a very, very low voltage and current. It's about 1.5 volts at 600 milliamps, at 0.06 milliamps, to get all those magnets rotating, massive metals, rotating around the stator at about 200 RPMs. So that already violates some very cherished laws. And that's all because of the unique magnetization method that's been proven by Chief SEG engineer Fernando Morris.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think most people have probably seen the video. And I'll tell you, I had seen
lots of videos out there.
I've seen a few, and one of the older ones that I had seen, this was maybe back in around 2006, 2007, one of those first experiments where it was rotating, and I thought it's very interesting. But I'll tell you, the one that got me was probably about a month ago. I saw the 200 RPM video, and that, I mean, yeah, those magnets are just whirling.
Oh my, that's been out. Those have been out for a while, for like past 6 years or so.
Yeah. Now, since then, have they made progress, or is it kind of in a holding pattern?
Well, just understanding, they've made progress in understanding, what it takes to get that to happen. And it's not, real easy to get that to happen, at that rotational speed with that little amount of power. What makes that happen is the unique magnetization coils that, they're all there set up and ready to go for the stators and the rotors, which are the plates and the runners. The plates are the rings and the runners are the rollers, which are made up of, normally made up of 8 stacked discs, forming a cylinder.
Well, one of the things that was interesting to me is a lot of the things that have been described about the Searl effect over, some of these go back decades, right? Things that Searl himself has said and others have said. We see in that video, for instance, when it starts running, the magnets automatically space themselves, and I thought that was very interesting to see.
Well, that's normal. That's normal with any normally magnetized magnets. You can get them to do that. That's just the repulsion of the magnets, regularly spaced. Oh, and by the way, nominal SEG in the inner layer, single plate and runner gyrocell, to a nominal three-layer SEG gyrocell. The inner layer of runners has to be 12. Has to be at least 12.
Okay.
And what is happening there is really interesting. It's everybody wants to try to think that magnetic motors and the Searl Effect Generator in particular are weird and exotic and so out there, but they're really utilizing, as Professor Searl has said, but he says nobody listens, that they're utilizing simple principles that we use every day in electromagnetics every single day.
Yeah.
All of us, and we don't even realize it without even knowing it. For instance, what is happening is that the plate, the ring, and the runners, so the stators and the rotors, rotating parts, are magnetized 90 degrees out of phase. Still there?
Yep.
Okay, they're magnetized 90 degrees out of phase, and they're magnetized with a special coil that is a regular DC coil with one turn of AC wrapped around it, helical fashion. So what is happening, those are, the DC and the AC are magnetized exactly simultaneous, and they have to be simultaneous because if everything's okay, you got your sums right, you got your frequencies right, power levels right, what will happen on the iron layers, and only the iron layers are magnetized, nothing else. Neodymium's not magnetized. Only the iron layers are magnetized. What you have when you bring a stator or a runner set to a stator is it makes a wave. It makes a sine wave, and the runners are basically carried along in the troughs of the wave. The wave is not stationary. It starts to move. It starts to move if you have everything all magnetized correctly. And that's because you're making with this coil, the DC plus AC coil, the equivalent of helical magnetic gear teeth on the stators and the runners, the plates and the runners. And that's an imbalance. In other words, there's no chance of magnetic lockup, which happens when you're building a magnetic motor and you don't have everything arranged quite right. You will have magnetic lockup. In other words, you'll have equilibrium in the system. The SEG is designed to have no equilibrium in the system. So what happens is, as soon as you bring a runner to a stator, it forms these two waves, or sine waves, at 90 degrees to each other, and that makes a magnetic moving wave, something completely unique, unless you've seen like a linear motor. In terms of Howard Johnson's patented magnetic motor, it started out as a linear motor. And what you're doing with this and Howard Johnson's motor is you're taking that linear motor and wrapping it into a circle. So you get continuous rotation. Yeah. And it's really interesting what's going on there. And in the law of the squares, and I highly recommend everybody Google review the law of the squares. Look at any of Professor Searl's writings on the website or in the books or anything. Law of the squares, ancient numerical system. The law of the squares, true SEG, where you have laminated elements. In other words, the inner element of the stators and the inner elements of the runner sets, that's neodymium. That can be any rare earth, but they've been using neodymium since the beginning, since 1946. Well, neodymium in 1946 was used chiefly by the glass-blowing industry to polish and tint glass. It tinted glass a beautiful purple color, and it was used to polish the glass because it was very smooth. The particles were very smooth, and it was very heavy. So they used that to polish and tint glass. So it was very cheap. It was like 25 cents an ounce. And now it's more like a couple dollars, $2 or $3 an ounce. So it's gone up like 100% or over as soon as the magnet companies found out, in the mines and everybody found out that you could make the most powerful magnets on Earth with rare earths. They raised the price tremendously for no reason other than it's an energy source. And you can go back and do some research on China, where China a couple of years ago, almost exactly a couple of years ago, restricted exports of neodymium and other rare earths to the West. And China, rare earths are not rare. There are mountains of them, but only in certain countries around the world. Australia has them. I believe Canada has them. Eastern Europe may have a lot of them. China has a lot of them. The Chinese are no fools. They're very, very, very bright, and they know that, like uranium, rare earths are an energy source, and they'll continue to be an energy source in, rare earth magnets, special alloy magnets, make magnetic motors and generators possible. Because don't forget, Tim, and I know you've discovered this from your research too, magnets are gate pumps for the ether, or cosmic energy, vacuum energy, zero-point energy, quantum foam, Dirac sea of electrons, you name it, it's all the same thing, different names only. The vacuum, take little pieces of vacuum. Go look at Tom Bearden's research, his new Tesla scalar electromagnetics. The vacuum is a source. Look at Wheeler's work. My gosh, Wheeler calculated that the vacuum has an equivalent energy density of 10 to the 94th power cubic centimeter. So, just think of how much energy that represents if you were able to liberate all the energy from that mass. And it's, unbelievably staggering amounts of energy. And it's been said quite accurately, you take 1 cubic meter of free space or vacuum, that has enough potential energy to vaporize all Earth's oceans. So think about that. Way, way, way more energy than matter, antimatter annihilation.
Oh, yeah. Well, now, Russell, let me steer you back towards the SEG for a moment, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to find out kind of where that's at and then how that leads towards the Searl IGV project, which I know is your own baby, just based on your expertise.
Well, yeah, that's my baby. Yes, sir, that's my baby. And, there is no better, cheaper, safer, faster way to, for aerospace, air travel, just simple air travel, as well as space travel. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And it has so many advantages. And it's really, really incredible that this technology basically came from a series of 2 oddly recurring dreams that Professor Searl had as a young boy from age 4 to age 10. Well, now, and the dreams primarily dream number 1 involved a game of hopscotch, which involves 8 squares. That's very, very important if you want to understand the law of the squares. The law of the squares basically is a model for how nature coheres and polarizes this random vacuum flux to produce usable energy, whether electrical or mechanical.
Okay.
And basically, if you have like 2 squared, the SEG operates on 2 squares. In other words, 4 horizontals and 4 verticals. If you have consecutive numbers in all the horizontals and the verticals squares, think of magic squares and the game, that game. You think of that. If you have the numbers consecutive, and you take the sums of all the horizontals, the verticals, and the diagonals, they'll all be different. However, if you randomize those numbers and just think of the random vacuum flux, Wheeler said you think of them as black holes and white holes popping in and out of existence at a very high frequency, or this random energy that's just shooting all over the place, vacuum jitter. If you, just like the vacuum, randomize those numbers in the squares, do you know that you take all the horizontals, all the verticals, all the diagonals, they all are uniform now. The sums are all uniform, or the outputs, which is really, really interesting. So it's doing what nature does. That's why the squares are so important. And this numerical system goes way, 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 way back to the time of, ancient India, ancient Atlantis, ancient, any megalithic society that, pyramids building, ancient Egypt, which weren't the Egyptians, the pyramids in the Americas and, the old world, all were built on these law of the squares principles. You talk about, NASA has duplicated sonic levitation, where it has 2 sound waves at right angles. They're able to lift anything, and that is on YouTube. They're using low power to lift lightweight objects. But back around, about 80, 90 years ago, there was an expedition And this guy was part of either the Royal Society or some German society, German Scientific Society, went to Tibet, and he had heard about Tibetan levitation and observed how it was being done. And that description is also online, and I highly recommend people read it. It's also to be found in the book Antigravity and the World Grid, edited by D.H. Childress, a sonic levitation that's operating on very, very esoteric principles, but nevertheless known principles of physics, where you're influencing atoms at their nucleonic level to make them immune to gravity, or beyond gravitation, anti-gravity.
Yeah,
they lose their weight and beyond.
That's the squares. That's the law of the squares. Now, what was the other dream that Searl had?
Yeah, the other dream was where there was like a shed where he grew up, or a barn, or I believe it was a barn rather, and he is climbing a long ladder to get to the hayloft, and he gets up to the top of the ladder and opens a trapdoor, and around him there are straws laid out in radial fashion, going from inward to outward, and there's like either 64 or 128 of them. Based on square of 8. Basically, 8 squared is 64. So, he sees these straws laid out, and not only that, there's a ring of fire at the very rim of this arrangement, indicating that what he was to build had a high concentration of energy at the rim.
Okay.
And in fact, that's what we see at the rim of the IGV. That's where the SEG, the flight SEG, is located, near the rim. And it's all controlled from the outside of the SEG.
Yeah. Now this brings us back to current research, because what's currently been built is a single ring system, and to make the IG, or the Searl Levity Disk, the actual anti-gravity craft, I understand that the research has to continue to go to that second, and then eventually the third rim, the third layer of the SEG.
Well, you could get one layer, one ring and roller set to fly if it's overloaded in the true law of the squares SEG with the laminated elements. 2 squared, 4 elements. 2 squared is 4, so 4 elements you need for a nominal SEG. You need an electron reservoir, because the whole point of the Searl effect, what happens, you need 1.5 volts at 600 milliamps to get them rotating at 200 RPMs. Well, look at the Barrett report, and you can have people Google the Barrett report. Google the Barrett report. Probes placed on the inner neodymium layers of SEG plates or runners and the outer copper or aluminum layers will show deflection in the needle of voltage anywhere from 3 to 12 volts. So that's more than enough to get the runners rotating, because as the experiments show, you only need 1.5 volts at 600 milliamps to get them up to a really fast speed, which is amazing. So what you're getting, because you have neodymium or any rare earth, well, neodymium is the cheapest rare earth, you have neodymium at the center, you have another element to act as a gate, plastic material. Plastics are good insulators. And then you have your Electron Accelerator, and that is the magnetized iron layer with the DC plus AC coil. And that makes the equivalent of pinpricks of magnetism all the way around the plates and the runners' iron layers. And that acts like perfectly spaced helical magnetic gears made out of magnetic fields. And then you have another layer, which is your paramagnetic layer, or diamagnetic layer, I guess paramagnetic layer of copper or aluminum. And as you know, next to strong magnetic fields, aluminum or copper pulls away, or the source of the magnetic field material will pull away. And that's very important. What's formed as eddy currents. And those are opposing electrical fields that repel each other. And so the runners float above the plates while being locked magnetically from magnetic attraction of the two iron layers. North-south, all these pinpricks of north-south poles, north-south, 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 going all the way around, but not laid straight up and down in a helical skewed fashion. And there's a lot of advantages to helical gears, and I won't go into that right now, but the listeners can look up helical gears. In fact, a lot of the new, I'm a helicopter pilot, and in fact, I was just down at the field at Valley Forge flying one of my Airwolf helicopters. The newest helicopters, the best ones, have helical gears for their main gears, and it's really interesting. The helical gears distribute the power more evenly and better, and a whole lot of advantages to helical gears, but one of the most important advantages in the SEG is that they help to introduce disequilibrium in the system, which means that they're going to start moving. Well, what happens when you have this current flow of electrons, negatively charged particles? The positive hub, the inner neodymium layers are positive, the outer layer, copper or aluminum, is negative. So positive at the center, negative at the rim. Well, you get a current flow. The disparate polarities produce a current flow. Well, what happens when you have current flow in the presence of a magnetic field? That's what we call an electric motor.
Well, so basically...
Tim, think of the stators and the runners of the SEG as individual little generators. Think of them as permanent batteries that never run down. You know, the great thing about neodymium or any rare earth is that they have extra electrons in their outer 4f and 5f band shells, or electron cloud layers. And these rare earths, like neodymium, readily give up and greedily suck up electrons from the environment. Well, there are electrons everywhere, even in the vacuum. In fact, Nobel winner Dirac called the vacuum a sea of electrons, which is very important and dovetails with a lot of other research in newer physics.
So you're saying that the SEG, so it is harnessing vacuum energy.
It's basically swimming in a sea of electrons.
Yeah.
Vacuum, you could think of vacuum as pre-electrons or virtual electrons. You can, whang the vacuum to give up all its electron volts in the form of an atomic bomb, or you can gently stroke the vacuum, which is what the SEG does, to make its soft electrons give up harder electrons, which are matter. Matter, after all, the most fundamental element of matter is the electron.
Yeah. So with the SEG now, they've constructed the 200 RPM model. Now, one thing I should ask is, have they seen the onset of the classic Searl effects yet? And I know there are a number of effects there. Have they seen those, or are they still below the threshold?
Well, the basic Searl effect is just to get the rollers rotating, and we've seen that for like the past 6 years. The first real SEG model I saw was at COFI 2, the Conference on Future Energy 2, sponsored by Tom Vallone and the Integrity Institute down in Washington, D.C., in September of 2006. And just on the heck of it, Fernando Morris said, hey, maybe we can get this to motor, as they did the old SEGs. First, if the fields weren't quite right, they'd have to superimpose a field on them to get them rotating. And past a certain rotational speed, they're on their own, and they could take the field away, and there was no way to shut them down. Now, if the fields are perfectly true, you won't have to do that. As soon as you place the runners on the plates, they start rotating one after another, after another, after another. And if you have soft iron, C-shaped soft iron cores wound with copper coils, that will, of course, there'll be cutting lines of magnetic force in an electrical generator to generate electricity. You can either move the magnetic field or you can move the conductor. Well, of course, in the SEG, you're moving the magnetic field, you're moving the magnets, and the conductors are stators. And it's basically like a brushless motor. But unlike a brushless motor, it's not only just cutting lines of magnetic force. Electrons by the trillions and trillions and trillions are streaming off radially off the rim of the SEG, just being inserted, flying into the coils. Think of it like, think of the runners like a wet tire throwing off rain on a wet road.
Okay.
Think of the fluid analysis, which Tesla often liked to use. Tesla said fluid modeling, visual modeling is better, far better than any esoteric mathematics you could use.
Yeah.
Although mathematics has its place and is very, very helpful. In fact, mathematics describes how you can build these things. But it's not your normal math. It's a simpler kind of math. And there are three groups of squares and only three groups of squares. Square group 1, you get oscillation. Square group 2, you get a rotation. And square group 3, you get an oscillation with a rotating cross at the center.
Ah, okay.
And I believe that the normal nominal SEG is square group 3, or class 3 rather.
Well,
so research the law of the squares. It's really interesting, and if you get your sums right by obeying the law of the squares, you'll get a perfect flow of electricity or electric current or electrons from the inner layer to the outer layer.
now, Fernando Morris, then, you'd said even though it wasn't perfectly aligned, he was able to get it to self-rotate?
No. Back in some earlier experiments, I guess, like about 10 years ago, maybe 9-10 years ago in Germany, they were building SEGs, and I saw a video on the, I guess it is the, the Disk Limited site, SearlEffect.com. That's John Thomas's site. There's a video, and there's an imperfection in the SEG. Professor Searl is just placing an iron layer, iron ring that's been magnetized Searl fashion to another larger iron ring, which is the stator. And as soon as he places it, the two parts are in contact. The iron ring starts rotating and orbiting around.
Okay.
And stops about halfway around because there's a crack. The manufacturing process didn't turn out quite right, and there's a crack in the material. You can't have any cracks in the material. This is made the old way by sintering powders of the different elements. And I don't know if it was me or someone else. I think I suggested to John Thomas, well, back in the day, they used to have to handle the neodymium in an argon box because neodymium on exposure to air corrodes very rapidly, and then it's unusable. So to get around that, they recalculated the squares laboriously and used a nickel blend. In other words, an alloy of neodymium blended with nickel so that it doesn't oxidize. And the musical instrument strings, I'm a guitarist, cellist, bass player, and musical instrument strings normally have a nickel plating to keep them from oxidizing as well, because steel, when it's exposed to oxygen in the air, oxidizes very rapidly, which means rusts, and at which point it degrades, the sound quality degrades very rapidly. So the nickel plating keeps that from happening. The same thing, nickel plating in the neodymium and the SEG keeps that from happening as well. It keeps from oxidizing.
Oh, okay. So this is actually a modification that you suggested that led to this new, in a sense, because it led to
it's just logic. And not only that, instead of using powders of material, they're using tubes of material and then machining them to avoid the costly and laborious step of sintering, that is compressing things under very high pressure and heat. So they're just machining the elements and pressing them together in a magnet press. That's a very mechanical device that presses layers of different elements together under tons of pressure.
Well, now let me ask, with the IGV then, I understand that there's always the funding issue at work, but how far away do you think the Levity Disk may be? Because there's so much progress being made with the SEG itself.
It's not that far, we just need probably about $500,000, $600,000 at our present level of FEC Corporation 501. We're allowed to raise $1 million, or just under $1 million. That's $999,000, 99 cents, basically, just under $1 million. To avoid any problems with the SEC or IRS. And with that, we are able to have a nice start on the materials we need and the funding we need to get everything going on the domestic SEG prototypes, which are level 2 square, or rather level 4 square. That's 2 squared, 4 elements. 2 squared is 4, so 4 elements is your nominal SEG. And your SEG, the interesting thing about it, it works on the principles of negative energy or negative entropy, or neg-entropy, as Tom Bearden calls it. Things seem to work in reverse. On all conventional generators, even the Howard Johnson magnetic motor that's hooked up to a generator, the more load you put on it, the hotter the generator, the basic dynamo gets, the hotter it gets, and the slower it runs until it eventually stops if you put too much load on it. Well, the SEG doesn't work like that. It puts out a cold current because of the negative resistance of all the electrons flying into the windings. Cold current. So what you're getting, if you put a load on it, it speeds up. It works the opposite, which is very, very interesting. It is very confounding to someone who has been studying conventional classical electrodynamics all their life, and here's something that doesn't obey those laws. It works in the opposite fashion. If you put a load on it, it gets colder and it speeds up. Not only that, past a certain threshold, it will also get lighter. In other words, it weighs less.
Oh, okay.
As the temperature is diving down because of all the electrons flowing through it and creating negative resistance, cool instead of heat. What happens when it reaches 4 Kelvin, you've overloaded it, the neodymium starts superconducting. The neodymium becomes a high-temperature superconductor. High temperature in terms that normal to get a superconductor, normally you have to use super-chilled elements such as liquid nitrogen. Well, when you're overloading the SEG, it gets down to a certain point when it's overloaded. It's 4 Kelvin. At that point, the voltage that's going out of it is incredible. It's unbelievable. And it's a very low amperage, only about 1.5 milliamps. Whatever the power level, the current stays at 1.5 milliamps, which is very interesting. It's high energy electrostatics.
Oh, okay.
Very, very interesting, like the Brown effect that I use in applied electrovitics, the T.T. Brown, the Biefeld-Brown effect. We only need very, very low current. In the vacuum, you can turn the current down even lower to get the same or more effect. So it's more efficient in the vacuum. Anyway, that's an aside. Basically, what happens when it starts, the neodymium or whatever rare earth you're using as an electron reservoir, turns into a superconductor. At that point, voltage goes unlimited. You're open the vacuum floodgates, and the SEG and anything attached to it loses all inertia. At the same time, Professor Searl figures the Earth repels it, and inside the inner ring, or inner 1/3 of the device, you have a 1/2 G gravitational field. So basically, Professor Searl says, well, 2 like fields repel. 2 gravity fields repel. Well, up until the SEG, we had no real way of producing a gravity field. But the voltage is so much, as we know from relativity, energy and mass are equivalent. You access gravitation by having a large localized concentration of mass or a large localized concentration of energy.
Yeah.
Well, in the SEG, we have a large localized concentration of stupendous electrostatic potential, which is energy, and you have your gravity field, and you have no inertia, and the Earth's field. What I'm thinking also is that since you have a very, very, very high negative field at the rim, in other words, electron surplus at the rim, electron deficit of the hub, in other words, positive of the hub, negative of the rim, you have something that will repel from the rim. The Earth's surface is negatively charged, highly negatively charged by trillions, if not billions of volts. And of course, like the bird on the wire, we're immersed in this electrical field and don't feel a bit of it.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So what is happening also, not only is a superconductor repelled from a magnetic field, well, the Earth's magnetic field is strongest at its surface, it's being repelled. A superconductor is repelled from a magnetic field by quantum displacement, and we've seen those videos online too. It's very, very stable, as is the IGV in flight. It's silent and extremely stable. what's happening is you have highly negative charge at the rim and a highly negative charge at the Earth. Those two like polarities will repel with great force. But you have a highly charged center. And in fact, if the SEG drive is switched on very rapidly and it's repelled from the Earth, it used to take up a chunk of Earth with it. It's one reason the landing legs have to be so long. At the center is an attraction zone which can be used to pick up almost anything and hold it there. As we know from P.A. Laviolette's Subquantum Kinetics, which I highly recommend everyone read, as well as his newer book, came out in 2008, exactly 4 years ago, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. In subquantum kinetics, positive charges attract and negative charges repel. And in fact, Tim, we see this in the T.T. Brown saucers that I built and devices that I sell and levitating devices that I fly. I've built a T.T. Brown saucer since 1990. What happens is basically there's a positive field around the anode wire or copper tube or whatever, and the saucer is charged negative chassis ground like every other aircraft or car or device or whatever. So negative chassis ground, it's going to be pulled in to the positive pole of the ahead of the device very, very rapidly with great force. And the higher the voltage, and it's extremely dependent on voltage, in fact solely dependent on voltage, the higher the voltage, the more the Coulomb's force attraction of the device, of the saucer for the anode. And in fact, in the more advanced saucers, which started coming around, I guess in Germany, in World War II, mid to late 1940s, one reason they had Operation Paperclip is not just for the V to the A4, Hitler's A4, which was von Braun's. It was for all the other German saucer scientists like Mithi, Schriever, Habermas, and of course Victor Schauberger.
Yeah.
And his work, showed how you can build up tremendous voltage with just a spiral of air or water. That's the key, the voltage. It becomes tremendous.
And in a sense, the rotating vortices, this ties back into the SEG in many ways.
It ties back into a lot of anti-gravity theoretical and actual working devices. Look at the French patent by Marcel Page. Look at Petit Viton's work. Look at, of course, Victor Schauberger, but Burkhard Heim's contrabaric effect. That's the Searl effect. Basically, Marcel Page said if you take a charge of electrons, extract a charge of electrons from any body, and rotate that charge of electrons around that body, the body will degravitate.
Okay.
And that's what we see in all these solid-state and rotary anti-gravity generator devices. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of patents out there. And people say, oh, well, patents don't work. There's no proof. Anybody can get a patent. Well, in my experience, all the patents that I have built, they have worked as good or better than as claimed in the patent. So that argument just doesn't fly, to, pun intended, So anyway.
Well,
anyway.
And I'm hoping that with the IGV, when you get that built, that would be, I think that'll be a wonderful breakthrough. And
it's proven technology. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We just have to rebuild the technology. And don't forget, like the atomic bomb or hydrogen bomb even, the IGV is low tech. Everything that started to come around in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that's all high-tech. It's ancillary devices. The IGV and the Brown devices are low-tech.
Yeah. And that makes it, I think, a little more robust. Well,
absolutely, yes. And one thing, you have to have your spaceport, your IGV spaceport, located at least 2 miles away from highways or other airports because it produces massive, RF and EM interference. In fact, at one point, IGV blanked out ground-to-air transmissions from an airport in southern England. And there were 42 models built, flown from Warminster and Berkshire, England. And in fact, the P-11, P-12s were stored in Archangel, Russia, an agreement with Russian scientists, because there was no place to house them for safety's sake in the UK. Don't forget, they had no way, once the generators were started, they had no way of stopping them until 1969 or 70. I believe it was 1970. Professor Searl was on a Canadian TV program, and the SEG was going. And he had just finished saying, once they're started, there's no way to stop them. The camera panned down from Professor Searl's face to the SEG. At that point, the SEG slowed and stopped. And Professor Searl's mouth fell open, and the camera went up immediately to catch his expression, which was one of total shock and surprise. Immediately after that, the runners started rotating again. The SEG started rotating again. And at that point, Professor Searl knew how to slow and stop the SEG for even greater flight control. What was happening was that the camera has an oscillator tube, and that oscillator tube was making an artificial pole on the outer set of runners just passing. And that was introducing equilibrium into the system that had disequilibrium, which caused the rollers to stop. And since that, in every IGV, they would have a camera oscillator tube to control the speed of the SEG, which would also control the SEG's lift, ancillary or main control, and its speed in forward flight. And its speed in forward flight is much faster than any rocket, with no sonic boom, no noise, and no inertia.
Yeah.
But there is 1/2 G onboard gravity. So in spacecraft, you have a condition where the bones and joints of astronauts do not degenerate from lack of gravity. And I should mention that also, at anything from 500,000 to 1,000,000 volts, which is on the very, very low side of SEG-powered idle, no air can come near the device. So in a manned craft, it's just pushed away like everything else. There's a force field at the rim because the negative charges, don't forget, negative charges in subquantum kinetics repel, and positive charges attract. Excuse me. So no air can come near the SEG at anything from 500,000 to 1,000,000 volts, which is, nominal SEG at idle, very low, very, very, very low rotational speed, low power. So for a manned craft, you have to have life support system. So in the early 70s, NASA was in contact with Professor Searl, and Dr. Arthur Kane from NASA worked with the team in various photographs of the demo one, the 21-footer, the last craft built, 7-meter craft, was seen wiring up the craft. The wiring buses and wiring blocks were all on the outside of the inner cabin wall, outside of the inner cabin wall. And those wires would go out to the controlling flight cells, 64 struts making up the profile of the SEG in radial fashion, and 64 flight cells or flight control cells. And for the normal flight, you wouldn't really need anything on the external to control it. But because of Civil Aeronautics Board said, well, what if you have a power out condition? How are you going to glide the thing down? He has these flight cells rotate from 0 degrees to 90 degrees for regular aerodynamic control in a power out glide condition. The Searl Levity Disk, or IGV, should be able to glide very nicely in a power out glide condition, but that wouldn't really happen because there's no way to shut it down.
Yeah.
But what happens is you have 4 flight cell conditions: flight cell open, flight cell closed, flight cell open and locked, flight cell closed and locked. And how you control the SEG for flight is a touch control and electronic control, 2 different systems. Inside each flight cell, of course, is a load cell, and there's a needle or pin, a rim discharge pin, coming out of the edge of each flight cell. And what happens is you're starting the SEG and putting it into a superconductive state for flight by letting the output of it overload on the atmosphere in a corona surrounding the device. And that makes a blue and then pinkish halo at higher power. Pinkish because there's a drop in pressure, drop in air pressure around the device.
Oh, okay.
Higher the voltage, the more air is pushed away.
Yeah, and then you pick up the nitrogen glow from the atmosphere.
Right, nitrogen or whatever other gases, noble gases, whatever, oxygen. So the higher the voltage, the stronger the vacuum surrounding the device, the vacuum envelope. So anyway, what controls it is 64 switches, 64 channels of the 12-meter. They used to use 12-meter ham radio, and it was a very, very powerful signal. It was one of the few signals they could get through. Normally the device is radar invisible. It's invisible to radar frequencies. It was really interesting. They used to track it through a pinger,
Okay.
which is really interesting too. So what you'd have is that when a flight cell is activated, it turns from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, and at the same time fires a solenoid, relay solenoid through a tube, through a hole in the outer SEG housing wall. And that strikes a runner just passing, or set of runners just passing. At that point, just like touching the wheel of a gyro, the rotor of a gyro, the SEG drops at that 1/64th of its circumference, or in the case of what I've seen, the film loops of the control from Warminster, they used to activate the flight cells in quadrants of 16 flight cells each. And that point would just drop, and then the SEG would, or the IGV rather, would travel off in that direction. And if that tilt was maintained, just like a helicopter, it would fly off rapidly in the direction of that tilt. And simultaneous with that, there are 4 switches, and they would either make the upper shells positive or negative or oppositely charged for even further flight control, and send different polarity out through the rim discharge pins.
Well, Russell, let me redirect you for just a second. Let's go back to the IGV construction project, if possible. One of the things that I'd like to ask you is, when the money has been raised, when funding is in place, what are your plans to move forward with that?
Well, we're going to have a facility, 2 facilities possibly. The first facility will be here in southeastern Pennsylvania, in the rolling farmlands of southeastern Pennsylvania, and that will be a prime location of Searl Aerospace, Inc. And we'll have a second location in Southern California, right adjacent to Searl Magnetics. So I guess I'll be shuttling back and forth between L.A. and Pennsylvania. That's okay. I like to travel. But, we will have 2 facilities, and it's just going to be very exciting work. Possibly locating somewhere around here, maybe in an abandoned aircraft hangar, something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of aerospace companies around here. There's Boeing, there's Lockheed Martin, there's Piasecki helicopters, Sikorsky helicopters, a lot of aircraft companies just within a 2-mile radius. 2 miles, actually, very interesting thing, 2 miles from me in King of Prussia, PA, it used to be GE Aerospace, now it's Lockheed Martin. In the late 70s, 80s, it was Martin Marietta. But anyway, Thomas Townsend Brown, did some very important vacuum chamber work with his disk airfoils in 1959. That was after his successful vacuum and other experiments in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in the late 50s. In 1959, here in GE Aerospace, 2 miles from me, right across from the big King of Prussia Mall, he confirmed that his electrified disk airfoils work as well or better in hardest vacuum.
Well, and that's something that we might want to come back to in the future, but for today we're almost out of time. So I want to say thank you again. I sincerely appreciate your time and the detail of explanation that you provided on both the SEG, the IGV, and what the company is working on.
Oh, you're welcome, Tim. It's great to talk to you again. I could be more detailed, but of course we have a limited time. And I will be having a more detailed lecture this fall. I'm lecturing on the 9th of November at the Global Breakthrough Energy Conference at Hilversum, Holland, over in Europe this November, second weekend of November.
And where can people find information about that if they want to attend?
Yeah, go to www.globalbem.com for Breakthrough Energy Movement, globalbem.com. And you can find out all about the speakers, and a couple other Team Searl members are speaking and presenting there also, Fernando Vosa, most notably. And I think Cara Fay is also going to be showing another Searl film. I'll have a table set up to sell Searl story videos. If anybody hasn't seen it already, I highly recommend you go to johnsearlstory.com, and you can either buy the DVD or download the video and find out about the history and present-day work getting this very, very, very important work done. And this is our future. This and other work going on by other groups like the Keshe Foundation and other groups is going to get us to a point of a world where everyone wants clean energy, unlimited energy, that everyone can afford, even in the most remote part of the world. And that's going to, really make it a golden age, and that's the much prophesied golden age of Aquarius. That's coming. It's here now.